what are the benefits after almost 2 years? What are the benefits that podcast brought to your business? Because
Oh, I
you're
love
an online
this.
business.
Yes, I
Mm.
love this. So first and foremost, globally as a global thing, it's knowledge and growth.
Yeah.
Okay. So as an individual and as a person, particularly if you're an entrepreneur, you need a lot of personal development and growth. And because we can't all be experts at everything required to grow and scale a business, I
Okay.
thought what better way than to learn from others. So every week I get to hang out with really cool entrepreneurs who have expertise and wisdom to share. So it's mutually beneficial. It's beneficial for them for exposure.
Yeah.
It's beneficial for me for learning and the fact that I get to share that with my audience.
Okay.
But what I really see as the benefits of having your own podcast as an entrepreneur are what I call the 5 truths about
Okay.
podcasting.
All
And
right.
so I have these 5 keywords that I
What
teach
are they?
about. So if you'd like, I can get into them. So the first
Okay.
one, I'll list them and then I'll talk a bit about them. The
Okay.
first one is accessibility.
Yes.
The second one is intimacy, and I'll explain that word in a second because it sounds funny. The third one is growth.
Yes.
The fourth one is credibility.
Yeah.
And the fifth one is maximization of network. Now,
Yeah.
you can kind of guess what some of these mean, but if you'll allow me, I'd like to elaborate a little bit on each one of those.
Yeah. Go ahead.
All right. So accessibility. It's no secret these days that podcasting is becoming an ever popular medium as a marketing tool, as a
Yes.
business and a brand growth tool. Now, in terms of accessibility, there currently is no other medium that is as accessible as audio content. Sure,
Yes.
there's YouTube. Sure, there's social media. Sure, there are blogs, and all of those things are great and they have their place, but there's a problem. They require somebody to be looking at a screen.
True. Yeah.
Whereas audio is the most accessible because generally it's free, right? So if we're talking
Yeah.
about the average podcast, it's free content. You don't have to pay to listen to a podcast. So
Yeah.
there's the monetary thing out of the way for the average listener. And there's the accessibility. People are listening to podcasts on the go now more than ever, while they're walking the dog, while they're doing the dishes, while they're commuting to work. That is a big one.
Yeah.
In fact, if we look at the statistics, recent statistics that came out on listening to podcasting on the go, since 2014, there has been a 157% increase in listening to podcasts on the go from smartphones.
Wow.
157%.
A lot.
And that's just US statistics. So, we know that podcasts are global.
Yeah.
So in terms of accessibility, you cannot get more accessible than that. And when we look at number 2, which is intimacy, I know it's a funny word and everyone kind of giggles when I say it. So if you're thinking about what that means, get your mind out of the gutter. What I'm saying is intimacy is really about creating that relationship with your ideal listener or client if you are a business owner. And you cannot get closer to your client. Instead of being with them necessarily, you cannot always be with your clients face to face because you may have clients all over the world. But you can't get closer to them than being literally in their ears and creating that relationship with them week after week after week. And that's where you create real long-standing relationships. And that's where that intimacy piece comes in. You speed up that know, like, and trust factor that we talk about all the time in the marketing world.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
I have people that I'll meet in person at some sort of networking event. And I'll be like, oh my God, I've listened to every single one of your podcasts. I feel like I know you because they've spent so much time with me, even though we've never physically met. And so that's where you can create that intimacy. And then the third truth is growth. And we touched upon it a little bit, but there are multiple ways that you as an entrepreneur in your business can grow through having your own podcast. Hugo, you talked about this on a recent LinkedIn post, how it's allowed you to meet new people. It's allowed you to create a larger pool of business contacts. Sometimes people, and that brings me to credibility, which is the next one. Sometimes people are just more willing to talk to you if they can see that you are serious, that you have your own show, that you put out regular content, that you're someone who's going to stick around for a while. And I will tell you that it's not that it's magic that just because you have your own podcast, you're automatically going to be taken more seriously. But the truth of the matter is, if you are regularly putting out quality content that is valuable for your audience, and somebody that you are trying to connect with also has a similar interest in that audience, and they can see that you treat your audience well and that you put out consistent content, you are more credible in their eyes. And so credibility and influence as an entrepreneur through your own podcast go hand in hand.
Yes, and I will add that before I start my podcast, I wanted to do like a tech company. So tech company was trending in 2016. So I was going to meet investors, entrepreneurs, and I always say, "Can you look at my app? Can you take a look? Can we meet? Because I wanted money to do my app." So they always say no. So when the day I start my own podcast, and I stopped with the tech company. I was just doing podcasts. Those same people, they say yes to me. They ask, "Do you want to be on my podcast?" They say yes. So because of that, now I have the phone numbers. I have the emails. If I do another project, I can ask them directly. They know me already. So it's kind of funny.
Exactly.
Kind of funny when you don't have nothing, they say no. But when you have something that you can give it to them, like an audience, like a time to talk, they will say yes. So that's why I think that podcast is a good way to really get in contact with those people, even the one that say no to you.
It is. It really is. And that's a perfect example, Hugo, of where people will view credibility when it comes to somebody's business sense or somebody's, motivation behind things. Yeah. But I would build on that. And I would even say that it relates back to the intimacy piece, because if somebody said no to you a year ago, but then somehow they get wind of your podcast and they start listening to a couple of episodes of your podcast on their own time, by the way, by the time you may contact them again 6 months later, whether it's because you're looking for an investor or something of that sort, they may have already spent 5 or 6 hours with you without you even knowing it. And that's sort of the beauty of podcasting, is you never know who's listening necessarily when and where, but your show is on 24/7, basically. It's accessible 24/7 when you sleep, when you're working. It's something that works for you 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, 365 days a year, and on Evergreen. So that brings me to number 5, which is the maximization of your network.
Yes.
And a benefit there is, I'm a talker. I love to hang out with people. I love to meet new people, but I'm one person. I can't necessarily be at every major conference. I can't be at every major networking event in my town or in my province, or if you have American listeners in your state and across the country, you're just one person. You can't be everywhere all the time. And even when you are at a big event, those events are also limited either to the capacity of the venue or the type of people that are there. They have a certain fixed interest. Whereas with a podcast and your own individual podcast episodes living on Evergreen, basically you are everywhere all the time. Globally, I receive my stats that come from my podcast, and I'm always surprised when I look at these stats and my podcast is charting in countries that I'm not even targeting, like Japan and Russia, Australia, like all over the world. And yes, it's an English language podcast, so generally the listeners there must speak some English in order to understand the content. But it is surprising that I can have this global reach 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, 365 days a year, and I'm not necessarily targeting any one of those countries. But yet I can still have an audience, and my content and my message reaches a global audience. So that's how you maximize your network, is having a global audience.
You were talking about events too. Even if you go to an event, you cannot talk with everyone. You maybe talk with 5, 6 persons that night.
That's right.
But if they know you have a podcast, look, you can listen to my podcast and they can get back to you. So you never lost a connection. Connection will always be there. And like maybe tomorrow the people are going to start listen to your podcast and they're going to connect with you later on. So
that's correct.